26-year-old Suraj Gusain could feel his life slipping away as he fought to free himself from the crushing weight of the avalanche. His head barely poked above the snow, but his body was entombed beneath it as the mass rapidly hardened around him. The snow could soon become his icy grave. As he drifted in and out of consciousness, only one thought burned in his mind: his daughter. Who will take care of her when I'm gone? Suraj wasn't alone in this nightmare. The avalanche struck a group of climbers making their ascent up Draupadi Ka Danda II in India, engulfing over 30 people. For most, this would be their final climb. Almost all would perish beneath the cold, merciless snow. This is their story. In this video, we will explore one of the most tragic climbing disasters of recent times. Dozens set out to conquer Draupadi Ka Danda II. Dozens never returned. This is a graphic account of the tragedy. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The Draupadi Ka Danda II stands at 18,600 feet, overshadowed by the more formidable peaks of Thale Sagar and Meru. By comparison, DKD2, as it's known, is considered a gentler climb, ideal for beginners seeking their first taste of mountaineering. It did not have a history of avalanches, making it a trusted site for advanced mountaineering courses. But when 34 students of an advanced mountaineering class set out to conquer this safe peak, they never imagined the day would end with most of them dead beneath the snow. Sadly, they could not have been more wrong. The day began like any other. There were 34 students and 7 instructors in the group. Most of the students were young Indians in their 20s with a love for climbing and the outdoors. The instructors had undergone extensive training and were the best possible trainers one could get. It was meant to be a normal day for climbing. Climbing began at around 3:30 a.m. The sky was clear and the cold was bearable. They climbed up the mountain for a few hours until they arrived at their first summit, Rainbow Rock. This was about 16,800 feet, so they were just about 2,000 feet away from the summit. If all went well, they would reach the top soon and begin the long journey down. All did not go well. At Rainbow Rock, the group got into a fixed line and used ice axes to navigate their ascent. This was nothing out of the ordinary, and none of the climbers could have anticipated what would happen later that morning. By early morning, the students could already see the summit, and some students and instructors had already reached the top. The instructors at the top were working on fixing a rope that would make the last 500 feet of the journey easier for the students, and there was a generally happy mood in the air. The group had started with over 100 students, but 34 had persevered to the very end and had finally made it to the top. There was everything to be happy about. At this point, everyone on the slope was climbing through a single sturdy rope. Then some snow slid over from the top of the slope onto the ones below. It was surprising, but nothing out of the ordinary. It was merely a mini avalanche. None of them knew it was the harbinger of disaster to come. One of the climbers, a 28-year-old named Lalani, also saw the mini avalanche, but unlike the others, he was slightly bothered. He calmed himself. People had been climbing this mountain since 1981, and he had never heard of an accident. Surely there couldn't be one today. By 8:30 a.m., one of the students, a man named Sharma, reached the summit and unclipped himself from the rope. He walked away, relieved that he had finished the journey and reached the summit. If he'd waited just a moment longer, he might have lost his life. Just as he walked away from the rope, a crack appeared across the slab of snow he was on, triggering a huge avalanche that swept over the summit and onto the climbers behind him. It happened so quickly that even Sharma didn't fully understand what had occurred until it was over. Everything below the fracture line began to move, and the students screamed in horror as they stared death in the face. For many, that scream would be the last sound they ever made. Lalani, who had been uneasy after the earlier mini-avalanche, was not spared. A man toppled onto him as the avalanche came crashing down. He tried to use his axe to arrest his fall, but it was futile. He struggled to keep his head above the snow, but it was hard work. He knew these could be the last moments of his life, and an animalistic urge to survive kicked in. By the time Sharma realized what had happened, he was alone. The rope was gone, his colleagues were gone, and it had all happened in the blink of an eye. If you blinked, you'd miss it. Many of the students screamed, but Sharma later said he heard nothing. Several people had lost their lives in deadly silence. But this disaster was only just beginning. The screams eventually came once the snow settled. People were trapped beneath the heavy mass, and many had only a few minutes before they would suffocate to death. Some of the students who'd been affected by the avalanche had tumbled for maybe 10 or 15 seconds. Those were the lucky ones. 34 others had followed the avalanche into a deep, narrow crevasse that was about 80 feet deep. The good news, they hadn't tumbled off the side of the mountain. The bad news, the landing had already killed many. It was the greatest tragedy ever recorded on that mountain, and it could still get worse. Deep Thakar, one of the students launched into the crevasse, was somewhat lucky. He'd landed on his stomach and couldn't feel that anything was broken, yet at least. He was also lucky because his mouth and nose were above the debris, sparing him from suffocating to death, at least for now. He had only one prayer. Please, God, he prayed, let the snow stop falling. But his prayers went unanswered for a while. The snow kept falling, and he was in real danger of being suffocated. Then another student fell on him. Things had just gone from bad to worse. He could feel the feet of the trainee who had fallen on him twitching, and that was when he realized the other climber was also suffocating. That's when he began screaming for help. Elsewhere, it was just as bad. Lalani, who was also in the crevasse, was facing a nightmare of epic proportions. He was completely buried in the snow and had to shift his head and neck from side to side to create an air pocket so he could breathe. That small action saved his life. Another student, Suraj Gusain, had fallen unconscious during the avalanche and was only now regaining consciousness. He woke up to what he might have thought was hell. His head was above the snow, but his body was completely buried, and the snow was hardening. A few more hours, or perhaps even minutes, and he would die from hypothermia. That is, if suffocation didn't claim him first. Above the crevasse, the instructors looked on in horror. None of them had ever faced a disaster like this before. But thankfully, there was a protocol in place, and the critical first few hours of the rescue mission began. The first step was to radio base camp and alert other climbing parties lower down. Before long, a large-scale rescue effort was organized. No one knew if more avalanches would follow or if this was a one-off, but that didn't matter. There were lives in desperate need of saving. The instructors and trainers who were not affected rushed to the edge of the crevasse and started calling for their friends. When one received no answer, he began crying. They told the people stuck in the snow not to worry, and that they would come and save them, but that was futile reassurance. Many were already dead, and with every minute that passed, the chances of another person's life being extinguished grew. They quickly devised a safe system to get into the crevasse and start pulling out survivors, but they had to be quick and careful. The mountain had shown its true colors, and it could be a double tragedy if another avalanche came crashing into the pit. Beneath the snow, things were getting desperate. Lalani felt his life slipping away. The cold was so severe that he could feel the blood in his veins turning to ice. It no longer felt like he had an arm. But after what felt like half an hour, he finally felt the touch of another person. "You are safe," the person said. "We are getting out." Lalani was too tired to even thank them. Thakar, the fellow who had been buried beneath another student, was also rescued. The student who had landed on him, the one he'd felt twitching, had not made it. Thakar had no idea when the fellow passed away. He was dragged out of the crevasse 3 hours after he was found and laid next to 4 other bodies. He tried complaining about his leg. He could no longer feel it, and it was almost like he was paralyzed. Then he looked at the 4 bodies he lay next to and realized that they were dead. The weight of the moment fully hit him. Soon, the rescue party realized the scale of the tragedy. Experienced and inexperienced climbers alike died under the unforgiving snow. One instructor, Savita Kanswal, who had set a national record by climbing Mount Everest and Makalu in 16 days, was found with her hand cupped around her mouth. She had tried to form an air pocket to allow her to breathe, but it was in vain. She had bested the tallest mountain in the world, but little DKD2 had claimed her life. As each hour passed, and as the rescuers pulled out another dead body, they realized just how devastating the avalanche was. At the beginning of the rescue mission, the rescuers may have hoped for just 1 death or 3. An hour into the mission, they may have hoped for just 10 deaths. 2 hours in, they may have prayed for only 20 deaths. But by the time they were done, they confronted the cold, hard truth. Of the 34 climbers who had crashed into the crevasse, 29 had lost their lives. There were only 5 survivors. The victims of the avalanche ranged in age from 18 to 47 and included a yoga instructor, members of the military, seasoned professionals, promising young mountaineers, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, sons, and daughters, all lost to an icy tomb in the blink of an eye. The post-mortem of the disaster revealed nothing surprising. Avalanches happened fairly regularly on that mountain, but they were usually small enough not to cause fatalities. The climbing group had done nothing wrong safety-wise. The team had taken all the precautions possible. The truth, as many climbers already know, is that it is possible to do everything right and still die by nature's hand. The best we can do is take all the precautions we can, but that is not always a guarantee of safety. Climbing snowy peaks remains an extremely dangerous pastime. Thank you so much for watching. In this video, we took a deep dive into the deadly avalanche and the lives lost. We saw how nature's unpredictability can affect even the most experienced climbers. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think you would have done if you'd also been on that mountain? Would it put you off climbing forever? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories like this. See you in the next one.